In the Mishneh Torah, Harambam seems to suggest that we should go into isolation or live as a hermit if our society is corrupt. How bad does it have to get before we would need to do this? Can one argue that today's Western society is corrupt and we should model our communities in a way that isolates us, right? So this question is an important question because Harambam does seem to say that, and I'll bring up for you the halacha that the questioner is referring to. It's a halacha in Hilchot Derot. How do I share screen? Let me see. How do I share screen? Here. Why am I not seeing it? Let me see. One moment. It's not where it usually is. I think everything changed. Oh, here we go. Share screen. Okay. There we are. Okay. So this is a halacha in Perek Vav of Hilchot Deot, halacha Aleph. And Harambam writes as follows. He says, Derech briato shel Adam, liot nimshach b'deotav u'b'ma'asav achar re'av v'chaverav. What Harambam is saying is that basically human beings are social animals and that we are influenced, whether we like it or not. And that is a key bit to this halacha here, that we are influenced, whether we like it or not, by those with whom we keep company, right? How it is, those with whom we engage. And that can be, remember, because we're talking about the mind and how it is the mind calibrates itself, right? The mind calibrates itself with other minds, right? It is extremely susceptible to thought from outside thought and to ideas from outside ideas. And these ideas can be dangerous and problematic. So he sets that line up at the opening, and he says, the nature of a human being, derech briato means the way of his creation, is liot nimshach b'deotav, is to be pulled in his deot, in his thinking, u'b'ma'asav, in his behaviors, ahare'av v'chaverav, after his friends and his colleagues, right? The people that he spends the time with. V'noheg kiminhag anshe medinato, and of course a person behaves as people behave in their society, right? So, the British and the Americans and the, whoever else, the Israelis, they just don't act like each other. They don't think about things, many things like the other does. And certainly there are certain things that we hold that are, common in terms of being human beings on the planet. But, there's a huge amount that does not overlap in terms of how it is that various individuals and various groups of people relate to the nature of reality and how they frame the way that they interpret the world. So what does Harambam say? And this is very important. Harambam says, therefore, tzarich adam lithaber latzadikim. Therefore, it is imperative that a human being who wishes to be tzaddik, or who wishes to engage along the path of being a tzaddik, to spend time with tzaddikim. V'deshev etzel hachamim. And for that matter, if you want to be a thinking individual and a person who is able to sense and assess and to frame reality in the closest approximation possible to what's really going on, spend time with the Hachamim, because this is what the Hachamim do. They have set themselves to live this way and to engage this way. And one should do so tamid. One should do so always. So that you can learn. Now, I think this is extremely, just before we get into kind of, what do you do? Do you live as a hermit? It's extremely important to understand this basis that Harambam is putting out. And something that I point out very often, relatively often, is that this idea about thinking for oneself is a farce. Right? Human beings really do not think for themselves. There's really no such thing as a human being thinking for oneself. What we do is we think like the people with whom we associate. And that could also be the people that we read or the people that we absorb in terms of information and rhetoric and so on and so forth. Those that I expose myself to are the ones that I'm going to start thinking like. Yeah, they are the ones that I'm going to be influenced by. So what do the Hachamim say? The Hachamim never say, think for yourself. The Hachamim say, don't think like those people, think like these people. Don't think like the people over there, think like the people over here. And who the people over here? The Hachamim and the Tzaddikim. And what they say is, spend time with them. Notice, it doesn't even say learn from them. It says spend time with them, cling to them, become their friends so that you might learn from them, right? So this is more a question of with whom do you spend your time? Who is your social group? Your social group is one of the most important decisions that a person can make because the people that you spend time with will be the people that influence your thought. And that is something that a human being, for all intents and purposes, really cannot get away from. It's very difficult to get out of that. So then Rambam says on the other side, Yitrachek min harsha'im, right? Keep away from people that are selfish and destructive and counterproductive and so on and so forth. Why should you keep away from them? So you don't learn from them. Notice again, to reiterate, Harambam does not say, if you're going to spend time with Rashaim, make sure not to learn from them. That apparently is not an option, right? Because if you're going to spend time with Rashaim, you're going to learn from them, whether you like it or not, whether you're aware of it or not. All right, and he brings a pasuk with regards to this, and then he says, "V'chen im haya b'medina." Now, it's not just about your close 5 friends that you spend most of your time with. What if you live in a particular society? Shemin hagoteh hara'im, that the ways that they do things are not good. Ve'en anasheh ha'olchim b'derech yashara, and its population, right, its citizens do not walk in an upright path. What should a person do? Leave that place and go to a place she'anasheh tzaddikim. You should leave that society and live in a society that is more righteous and does right. V'nohagim b'derech tovim. And then he says, well, what if there is a situation in which, no matter where you go, society is a mess? Then these 2 words are key. Like in our times, where no matter where you go, things are a mess. And Harambam says close to 900 years ago, like in our days. So back to the questioner, right, to the question, he's saying, he seems to say, right, can one argue, how bad does it have to get? It's already bad. In other words, it was already that bad in Harambam's time. And it's very important to recognize that it was already that bad in Harambam. Now, you're going to say, things have gotten better? Yes, on a certain level, things have gotten better with the general population. On a certain level. What do I mean on a certain level? Think about the nature of humanity in the time of Harambam and then the times that we're living in now. How were people treated? What was the thinking of individuals at that time? How were women treated? How were poor people treated? How were people that were handicapped treated? How were people that were learning disabled treated? How about people that had mental difficulties? How were they treated? Think about the nature of hunger in the world in Harambam's time. Has it gotten better? Has world hunger improved since the time of Harambam? Yes, so a great many cases can be made that in general, the population of humanity on the planet is doing better now than it was doing in Harambam's time. But the question is ultimately, can we say that society is walking righteously? And that I don't think that we can say. I don't think that we can say that overall society is walking righteously. And there's many reasons for that, right? And if we're going to say essentially that the society is walking any more righteously than it was in Harambam's time in local levels, well, then what Harambam says is Yeshiv Badad V'idom. You need to pull yourself away from that to some level. Now, what does that mean? So he says, look, so first he says you should pull yourself away, disengage to a certain degree from the general population. Right, and I'll explain what it is that ultimately that means. Because think about Harambam. In other words, he says in our time, what did Harambam do? Right, Harambam didn't live as a hermit. Harambam went to work in Cairo every day, and then he came back and he held clinic, and practiced medicine, and then he was engaged with the general Jewish community and so on. Right? Was he engaged in society? Well, no, not really. Okay, so I'll unpack that in a minute, a little bit. I know we're only on the first question, but it really is a very important question, and it is very important, very pertinent. So what Harambam ends is, if you can't just keep to yourself, if they don't even allow you to be able to keep to yourself where it is that you're living, then you need to go to the desert and live there, isolated, and so on and so forth. All right, so I think that to be able to question what is the practical aspect of this particular halakha is that a person must be, if a person wants to be righteous and a person wants to be a hacham, then a person must be highly scrutinizing of how much you engage in society in general. And what does that mean? That means, where are you spending the majority of your time? And when I say where are you spending the majority of your time, I mean both mentally and physically. Where are you? So you're in society, and you're in society casually. Just know that you will become part of that society in nature. Your behavior will become behavior that mimics that society, and your thinking will become part of the behavior that thinks like that society. Now, you may think that you are kind of the fish swimming upstream in your particular society, but I'll tell you one thing, and this is one thing that is personal, that I've experienced having lived in many different places, right? I've lived in the United States, I've lived in the UK, I've lived in Israel. And there's one thing that I recognize. People think that they're being different, but they're not being very different than the people with whom they live. Right? They can think differently than the other people that they live with, but for all intents and purposes, they are like the people that they live with. Right? So Brits are like Brits. They could be right-wing Brits and left-wing Brits and all kinds of Jewish Brits and so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, if you're an American and you come to Britain and you meet any single one of them, they're all British. And they all think like British people, and they all live like British people, and they all function like British people, and they see the world through British eyes, and vice versa. You go back to New York or wherever it is. And by the way, there are microcultures, right? So you go back to New York, and there's a bunch of different New Yorkers, and there are New Yorkers that are completely at odds with other New Yorkers in terms of the way they think, but they're all New Yorkers. And they all actually talk like them, think like them, see the world through New York eyes. And then you go to LA and you realize, wow, they're really weird, right? They're really out. They're not like anybody. Yeah, they're not like the New Yorkers, not like the Brits. Yeah, yeah. So they're all humans, and to a certain degree, but they all do the same thing. There is something that you simply recognize by the mass of people that they all hold in common. And that is Harambam's point. Harambam's point is you cannot get out of that. So you need to think about, and all of us need to think about this, right? To what degree am I genuinely engaging in society? When I say engaging, I don't just mean kind of going to the supermarket or whatever it is. To what degree am I drinking the Kool-Aid of society? And the reality is to a certain degree, Harambam is making a point. You don't know. You don't know. There's a certain level of it that you just cannot really know because you don't think about what you think about. You just think about. You just think. And you think how the people around you think. That's why Harambam opens with that line. So, look, is it practical to be able to go live as a hermit in the desert? No, it's not practical to live in a hermit. And Harambam didn't live like a hermit in the desert. But Harambam did refrain or pull back from society. He was not part and parcel of the social fabric. He was definitely a man of his time. He was definitely a man that came from the environment in which he lived. There's no question about that, and can't extract him from that. But he was as independent a thinker as you could be in those situations. And the reason he was is because he connected himself to tzaddikim and hachamim. How do you do that? Well, the good thing is that we actually have the thoughts of people who are dead accessible to us. You can genuinely choose to keep the company of the Tanaim and the Omoraim if you wish to on a daily basis. That's why I'm a tremendous proponent of Daf Yomi, right? People miss the point of Daf Yomi. They think, oh, how much are you going to remember if you're learning a Daf a day? The point has nothing to do. It has nothing to do with what you're going to remember. It has to do with that you spend time with the Hachamim every day. And if you spend time with the Hachamim every day, guess what happens? They're your friends. And you start to think like them. So that is what you do, right? You have to choose who's your crew, as we might say in modern times, right? Which is a modern term of society. Who is your crew? Who are the people that you are going to spend your mind, right? The time of your mind and your behavior with. So behavior, it's hard to be able to behave like the Hachamim of the Talmud outside of theory, right? You can read what they say and you can do to the best of your ability what it is you would think they do. But we are also, because we're a social species, we mimic. So you have to choose who you want to mimic. And that is one of the most important decisions that anybody will make in their life. Okay, so that's the most I can give now. I can obviously give a whole shiur on that, but good question. And there I leave you.